PODDOM, the daily newscast, March 30, 2022. Silver bullet or fool's gold? Ghana's e-tax marked by skepticism. Accra, March 29. Everything changed for Ghanaian storekeeper Isaac Slaw when his telecoms provider launched mobile payments for business in 2017. Sales boomed at his 20-year-old store as customers no longer had to pay cash for household goods that include mosquito repellent, batteries, razors, soap, and superglue. But as Parliament considers a new 1.75% tax on electronic payments known as the e-levy, Slaw said he may return to cash full-time. Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta proposed the e-levy in November to widen the tax net, but opposition was so fierce that it caused a brawl in Parliament a month later, and it failed to pass. The government plans to resubmit the bill next week and try to fast-track it. The lawmakers will recess on April 15, closing the window for its passage if it is not voted on before then. The tax, which would cover mobile money payments, bank transfers, merchant payments, and inward remittances, could raise up to 6.9 billion Ghanaian cedi in 2022, according to official estimates. But Ghana's $50.8 billion public debt is unlikely to drop significantly. We have pieces of goods going up each and every day, Slaw said. If a customer must pay a higher price for a commodity, then after paying that high price, he must also pay for the e-levy. It won't be good for business. Just as Ghana's small business owners begin to drift from cash-based sales, many believe the e-levy will price them out of the digital economy, but officials see it as the panacea for a rift of financial woes that could spark an economic crisis. Consumer inflation reached 15.7% year-on-year in February, the highest since 2016. The cedi depreciated some 20% against the dollar this year, second only to the Russian ruble, and public debt hovers around 80% of gross domestic product. The unyielding stance of the minority in Parliament against the e-levy gravely affected investor confidence in our capacity to implement programs and settle our debts, Ofori-Atta said at a press conference last week. Even if the e-levy overcomes Ghana's hung parliament, around 73% of Ghanaians oppose it, as a February survey by Global Info Analysis shows. But analysts said it could reassure investors and lenders of Ghana's ability to make tough choices to generate revenue, helping to narrow bond spreads. It's taken on a psychological importance for many investors, said Razia Khan, chief economist for Africa in the Middle East at Stanford Chartered. If there are no big revenue measures, it's not clear where the revenue upside is going to come from. Ghana's sovereign Eurobond yields have spiked in the last year, effectively shutting it out of international markets as investors consider the debt too risky. Ghana's $1 billion 2026 Eurobond is trading below par at 79.25 cents, with a yield of more than 18%, according to Refinitiv data. That lack of access factored into ratings agency Fitch's decision to slash Ghana's credit rating to B- from B in January. Moody's downgrade followed a month later, causing Ghana's sovereign dollar bonds to tumble further. In a note last week, J.P. Morgan analysts estimated a 30% probability of the e-levy passing in Parliament. Without it, they wrote, Ghana may have to pursue a debt relief program through the International Monetary Fund, which the government has so far resisted. We've got a critical 14 or maybe 15 days to make it happen, Ofori-Atta said. I'm sure if you pray with me, we can pass the e-levy. Side note, $1 equals 7.45 Ghanaian cedi. China-U.S. ties will degrade regardless of Russia. Washington, March 30. In many ways, it's business as usual in Washington when it comes to Beijing. The two capitals have recently squabbled over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but longer-running disputes are also still rumbling, possibly reigniting a trade war or screening U.S. investments in the People's Republic. Whatever happens in Ukraine, economic relations look set to get worse. Bashing Beijing continues to be a rare area of bipartisan agreement in Washington that could turn a trade war currently locked in a stalemate hot again. U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai told senators on Wednesday that most attempts to get China to change its behavior haven't worked, so the government should go on the offense. One option is another investigation similar to the one in 2017 that spurred former President Donald Trump to impose tariffs on currently about $270 billion of Chinese imports. The next probe, which could be launched later this spring, may center on Chinese President Xi Jinping's industrial policy, including his Made in China 2025 plan, which aims to beef up the country's expertise in sectors including electric vehicles, artificial intelligence, and agricultural technology. That could lead to another round of tariffs. Another measure being debated on Capitol Hill would, if passed, severely chill U.S. investment in China. This week, the Senate moved to reconcile its plan to boost America's competitiveness against the People's Republic with a version from the House of Representatives. One proposal would set up a process to screen overseas investment that targets China, while the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States scrutinizes inbound transactions for national security concerns. This would peruse outbound investments. Such a process could choke capital flows in a broad array of critical industries, including energy, chips, robotics, and communications. It would have covered 43% of foreign direct investments in China from 2000 to 2019, according to the U.S.-China Investment Project. The breadth of the plan could snag venture capital funds, joint ventures, and other businesses, though these are exceptions. China's relations with the United States would certainly worsen if it meaningfully had helped Russian President Vladimir Putin evade sanctions or assisted him militarily. But even if Beijing plays a neutral role, Washington already has other pressure points in the works that would intensify an economic decoupling. U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai on March 30 testified before a U.S. House of Representatives Committee on the government's 2022 trade agenda. In her written testimony, Tai said the United States needed to turn the page on the old playbook with China, which focused on changing its behavior. Instead, the government's strategy should turn to vigorously defending its economic interests against unfair Chinese policies. The U.S. Senate on March 28th approved its version of a plan to boost America's competitiveness against China in advanced technologies, including semiconductors. That opens the way for the chamber to reconcile its proposal with a similar plan in the U.S. House of Representatives, which includes an overseas investment screening process that targets U.S. private sector funding in China. Another provision would shorten the time frame to delist Chinese firms on U.S. stock exchanges from 3 years to 2 years if they don't provide access to a company's books to American auditors on regulators. U.S. SEC proposes boosting blank check company disclosures liability. Wall Street's regulator on Wednesday unveiled a draft new rule to enhance blank check company investors' disclosures and to strip them of a legal protection which critics say has allowed the shell companies to issue overly optimistic earning projections. The move by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission is part of a broader crackdown on special purpose acquisition companies after a frenzy of deals in 2020 and in early 2021 sparked concerns some investors are getting a raw deal. Wall Street's biggest gold rush of the recent years, SPACs are shell companies that raise funds through a listing to acquire a private company and take it public, allowing the target to sidestep the stiffer regulatory scrutiny of a traditional initial public offering. The SEC proposal, which is subject to public consultation, broadly aims to close that loophole by offering SPAC investors protections similar to those they would receive during the IPO process, the SEC said. Companies raising money from the public should provide full and fair disclosure at the time investors are making their crucial decisions to invest, said SEC Chair Gary Gensler. The rule would require SPACs to disclose more details about their sponsors, their compensation, conflicts of interest, and share dilution. It would also enhance disclosures about the target takeover, known as the SPAC, more information, including the sponsor's view on whether the deal is fair to investors and whether the proposed transaction has been vetted by third parties. Such disclosures would have to be issued at least 20 days prior to any solicited votes on the acquisition. The rule would also strip SPACs of a liability safe harbor for forward-looking statements such as earnings projections. The SEC has been stepping up oversight of SPACs amid worries of inadequate disclosures and lofty revenue projections and other conflicts. Reuters reported last year that the SEC was considering new guidances to rein in SPACs' growth projections. SPAC sponsors say the projections are important for investors, especially when targets are unprofitable startups, but investor advocates say they are frequently wildly optimistic or misleading, but have been shielded by the legal safe harbor. Wednesday rule, if finalized, would also broadly align the financial statement requirements of the target with those of traditional IPOs. If SPACs do not meet certain conditions, they may have to register as investment companies, subjecting them to a slew of other fiduciary rules. Those conditions include maintaining assets in certain forms, entering into a deal with a target within 18 months of the SPAC IPO, closing the transaction within 24 months, and ensuring the newly merged company is engaged primarily in the same business as the target was. Gatekeepers who facilitate the deals, such as auditors, lawyers, and underwriters, should also be held responsible for their work before and after the SPAC listing, Gensler added. The U.S. SPAC market experienced a wild ride in 2021, with an explosion in such deals during the first half of the year, which quickly cooled off in the second half of the year. All told, 604 SPACs raised $144 billion in 2021, according to data from Renaissance Capital. Ukraine and Russia, what you need to know right now. March 30, Russian forces bombarded the outskirts of Kyiv and a besieged city in northern Ukraine, a day after Moscow promised to scale down operations there. Russia's defense ministry said its forces were regrouping near Ukraine's capital Kyiv and the northern city of Chernihiv to focus on other key areas and complete the liberation of the breakaway eastern Donbas region. The mayor of Chernihiv in northern Ukraine, Vladislav Astroshenko, said Russian bombardment had intensified over the past 24 hours, with more than 100,000 people trapped with supplies to last about a week. Russia is shelling nearly all cities along the front line, separating Ukrainian government-controlled territory from areas held by Russian-backed separatists in the eastern Donetsk region, the regional Donetsk governor said. About 80 civilians have been killed and around 450 wounded in the southern Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv since Russia invaded Ukraine, the local mayor said. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said he discussed specific defense support with U.S. President Joe Biden in an hour-long call on Wednesday. Russian President Vladimir Putin was misled by advisors who were too scared to tell him how poorly the war in Ukraine is going and how damaging Western sanctions have been, a U.S. official said, citing declassified intelligence. Moscow and Beijing are more determined to develop bilateral ties and boost cooperation, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said after talks in China with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov as the Ukraine crisis rages. All Russia's big exports could soon be in rubles, the Kremlin signaled. Germany triggered on an emergency plan to manage gas supplies that could see Europe's largest economy ration power if a standoff over a Russian demand to pay for fuel with rubles disrupts or halts supplies. The number of Ukrainians fleeing abroad is now above 4 million, the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, said. Russia may have committed war crimes by killing civilians and destroying hospitals in its pounding of Ukrainian cities, the top United Nations human rights official said. I think their moral dropped. Most of them already understood that they made a huge mistake when they came here, Maxim, a Ukrainian soldier, said of Russian forces in the eastern Kharkiv region. Google cuts racy results by 30% for searches like Latina teenager. Oakland, California, March 30. When U.S. actress Natalie Morales carried out a Google search for Latina teen in 2019, she described it in a tweet that all she encountered was pornography. Her experience may be different now. The Alphabet Incorporated unit has cut explicit results by 30% over the past year in searches for Latina teenager and others related to ethnicity, sexual preference, and gender. Tulsi Doshi, head of product for Google's responsible AI team, told Reuters on Wednesday. Doshi said Google had rolled out new artificial intelligence software known as BERT to better interpret when someone was seeking racy results or more general ones. Beside Latina teenager, other queries now showing different results include Le Chef Lesbienne, college dorm room, Latina yoga instructor, and lesbian bus, according to Google. It's all been a set of over-sexualized results, Doshi said, adding that those historically suggestive search results were potentially shocking to many users. Morales did not immediately respond to a request for comment through a representative. Her 2019 tweet said she had been seeking images for a presentation and had noticed a contrast in results for teen by itself, which she described as all the normal teenager stuff, and called on Google to investigate. The search giant has spent years addressing feedback about offensive content in its advertising tools and in results from searches for hot and CEO. It also cut sexualized results for black girls after a 2013 journal article by author Sophia Noble raised concerns about the harmful representations. Google on Wednesday added that in the coming weeks it would use AI called MUM to begin better detecting of when to show support resources related to suicide, domestic violence, sexual assault, and substance abuse. MUM should recognize Sydney's suicide hotspots as a query for jumping locations, not travel, and aid with longer questions, including why did he attack me when I said I don't love him, and most common ways suicide is completed, Google said. Collins becomes first Republican to back U.S. Supreme Court pick Jackson. Washington, March 30. Senator Susan Collins on Wednesday became the first Republican to declare support for President Joe Biden's Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson, further boosting her prospects of becoming the first black woman to serve on the top U.S. judicial body. Collins, considered a moderate Republican, disclosed her intention to vote in the Senate to confirm the federal appellate judge in a statement released by her office. The senator said she reviewed Jackson's record, watched her testify during her Senate Judiciary Committee confirmation hearing last week, and met her twice in person, and concluded the judge possesses the experience, qualifications, and integrity to serve in the lifetime post. Collins lamented what she called a disturbing trend of politicizing the judicial nomination process. No matter where you fall on the ideological spectrum, anyone who has watched several of the last Supreme Court confirmation hearings would reach the conclusion that the process is broken, she said. In my view, the role the Constitution clearly assigns to the Senate is to examine the experience, qualifications, and integrity of the nominee. It is not to assess whether a nominee reflects the ideology of an individual senator or would rule exactly as an individual senator would want, Collins added. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, a Democrat, said last week the chamber was on track to confirm Jackson to the lifetime job before its expected break for Easter on April 8. Senator Joe Manchin, the most conservative Democrat in the Senate, announced last Friday that he would vote to confirm her, signaling that she will have the votes to overcome widespread Republican opposition. With a simple majority needed for confirmation and the Senate divided 50-50 between the parties, Jackson will get the job if Democrats remain united regardless of how the Republicans vote. Her confirmation would not alter the court's ideological balance. It has a 6-3 conservative majority, but would let Biden freshen its liberal bloc with a 51-year-old jurist young enough to serve for decades. The Democratic president nominated Jackson last month to the lifetime post to succeed retiring liberal Justice Stephen Breyer. During her confirmation hearing, several Republican senators accused Jackson of being lenient when she served as a trial court judge on sentencing child pornography offenders. Jackson defended her sentencing record, and American Bar Association witnesses rejected the allegations that she was soft on crime. Ukraine's Zelensky hires U.S. law firm for sanctions advice. Washington, March 30. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's office has hired an American law firm to advise on Western sanctions imposed after Russia's invasion and help engage with U.S. officials on policy matters, according to a filing with the U.S. Justice Department. San Francisco-based Morrison & Foerster will counsel Zelensky's office on regulatory issues, including U.S., EU, and UK sanction regimes, John Smith, a partner in the firm, said in the Monday filing. Smith led the U.S. Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, which oversees American sanctions, before joining Morrison & Foerster in 2018. Smith said in the filing that Morrison & Foerster will perform the work at no cost to Ukraine. The United States, European Union, and Britain have imposed a series of sanctions targeting Russia, its financial institutions, oligarchs, and parliament since Russia invaded Ukraine last month. The filing did not make clear whether there are specific sanctions about which the firm will provide advice. The firm said it will help Zelensky engage with U.S. officials on evolving policy matters, but did not provide specifics. Smith did not immediately respond to a request for comment. U.S. law requires law firms, lobbyists, and others to disclose certain advocacy work for foreign clients. Morrison & Foerster has not previously registered to represent a foreign entity, according to the U.S. Foreign Agents Registration Act database. Ukraine's government has hired at least 2 other U.S. law firms following the Russian invasion. Covington & Burling, headquartered in Washington, is representing Ukraine before the International Court of Justice, obtaining a ruling this month instructing Russia to stop its military operations. Attorneys at Quinn Emanuel Urquhart and Sullivan, founded in Los Angeles, are representing Ukraine before the European Court of Human Rights in a case accusing Russia of human rights abuses. Pfizer's bowel disease drug succeeds in second late-stage study. March 29. Pfizer Incorporated said on Tuesday its experimental treatment for an inflammatory bowel disease, acquired last year as part of its $6.7 billion Arena Pharmaceuticals deal, succeeded in a second late-stage study. Pfizer's etrasimod showed improvement in patients with moderate to severe ulcerative colitis after 52 weeks. It met the twin main goals of statistically significant improvement in remission at week 12 and week 52 compared to placebo. Globally, the market for inflammatory bowel disease is about $20 billion, making it a lucrative target for drug makers. Ulcerative colitis, a chronic inflammatory disease of the colon, is a condition that leads to ulcers and causes abdominal pain, bloody stools, and incontinence. Results from the late-stage study released last week showed the once-a-day drug improved symptoms in ulcerative colitis patients at week 12 compared to placebo. Statistically significant improvements were also achieved in all key secondary goals for both the late-stage trials. Pfizer expects to include data from these two late-stage studies, as well as its long-term extensions of the studies, in its planned regulatory filings for etrasimod that are anticipated to begin later this year. Oklahoma's Republican governor signs transgender sports ban. March 30. Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt on Wednesday signed a Republican-backed bill banning transgender athletes from girls' school sports, adding to a list of states that have passed or enacted similar laws. "We are protecting women's sports. We're ensuring a level playing field for female athletes," Stitt, a Republican, said at a signing ceremony surrounded by young female athletes. The so-called Save Women's Sports Act applies to public schools in the state through college. Oklahoma joined 12 other states that have enacted legislation prohibiting transgender girls from participating and competing in girls' sports in school. Similar bills that were passed in Arizona and Kentucky last week are awaiting action from the governors of those states. Opponents of these laws have characterized them as backed by conservative special interests to drum up support ahead of the midterm elections, when Republicans seek to win back a majority in the Senate and the House of Representatives. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimated in 2019 that just 1.8% of high school students in the country are transgender, and the advocacy group Human Rights Campaign has said that, according to surveys, only about 12% of them play on girls' sports teams. Transgender rights have been pushed to the forefront of the culture wars playing out across the United States in recent years, together with issues such as reproductive rights. The Human Rights Campaign said it is tracking over 300 bills targeting the LGBTQ+ community that are currently moving across state legislatures, many specifically aimed at transgender youth. WHO says most likely scenario shows COVID severity will decrease over time. March 30. The World Health Organization on Wednesday released an updated plan for COVID-19, laying out 3 possible scenarios for how the pandemic will evolve this year. Based on what we know now, the most likely scenario is that the COVID-19 virus continues to evolve, but the severity of disease it causes reduces over time as immunity increases due to vaccination and infection. Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said during a briefing. However, the WHO head cautioned that periodic spikes in cases and deaths may occur as immunity wanes, which may require periodic boosting for vulnerable populations. Talking about the other two potential scenarios, Tedros said either less severe variants will emerge and boosters or now formulations of vaccines will not be necessary, or a more virulent variant will emerge and protection from prior vaccination or infection will wane rapidly. The updated Strategic Preparedness, Readiness, and Response Plan sets out the strategic adjustments that every country needs to make to address the drivers of SARS-CoV-2 transmission, lessen the impact of COVID, and end the global emergency. This is the third Strategic Preparedness, Readiness, and Response Plan released by WHO and will likely be its last, Tedros said. The first report was released in February 2020 at the start of the pandemic. Russian hackers targeted NATO Eastern European militaries, Google. London, March 30. Russian hackers have recently attempted to penetrate the networks of NATO and the militaries of some Eastern European countries, Google's threat analysis group said in a report published on Wednesday. The report did not say which militaries have been targeted in what Google described as a credential phishing campaigns launched by a Russian-based group called Coal Driver, or Callisto. These campaigns were sent using newly created Gmail accounts to non-Google accounts, so the success rate of these campaigns is unknown, the report said. NATO was not immediately available for comment on the report. Russia, which is now under heavy Western economic sanctions following its decision to invade Ukraine on February 24, regularly denies accusations of mounting cyber attacks on Western targets. In 2019, Finnish cybersecurity firm F-Secure Labs described Callisto as an unidentified and advanced threat actor interested in intelligence gathering related to foreign and security policy in Europe. The group also targeted a NATO Center of Excellence, Wednesday's Google report said, without elaborating. As current officer holder, Teresa Cristina Diaz is set to resign to run for the Senate. Montes, a doctor, a former congressman, and mayor of Uberaba, was serving as Diaz's deputy in the ministry. He will take office on Thursday, according to the ministry's press department. Teresa Cristina Diaz has been head of the ministry since January 2019, when President Jair Bolsonaro was sworn in. She will now run for Senate in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul in an October election. In Brazil, office holders are required to leave their jobs before the election if they wish to run for a different one. Bruce Willis to retire from acting after medical diagnosis. Los Angeles, March 30. Die Hard star Bruce Willis will retire from his acting career after being diagnosed with aphasia, a disease that is impacting his cognitive abilities, his family said in a statement on Wednesday.